Hi guys, in this short video I'm going to talk you through a really simple 3-step routine that you can start to incorporate into your day-to-day routine to help with lower back pain and also hip pain as well. Now quite often what we find is that when we work with people and we assess them, they come to a session describing sort of niggly lower back pain, but actually when we look at movement positions in the body, we tend to find that it's actually the hips, so the muscles on the front of the hips that are particularly tight. Now what happens is that one of the main muscles, one of your main hip flexors that sits off the inside here, swings around the back and then connects into your lower back as well. So if that muscle is quite short and tight, it's going to take the pelvis, it's going to start to tilt it forward slightly and create a big excessive arch in your lower back, which is going to put stress on the lower back, and more often than not it's going to cause niggly lower back issues as well. So the 3-step guide that we're going to look at in today's session is first of all how to release off the hip flexors. The second one is how we can actually then stretch the muscle out and make it or bring it back to its original capacity. And the third step is going to be looking at how we can actually strengthen the buttocks on the back of the hips to help to restabilize that equation between the front and the back of the hips and make sure the muscles have the same sort of strength ratio front and back. So step number 1 is to use a foam roller. Now if you saw the previous video where we used a foam roller into the back of the hips, again if you don't have one, it's a worthwhile investment. They're not that expensive. You can get them online or get them in most good sports shops nowadays. We're going to use the foam roller to try and get into the muscle tissue and release off the tension. This is going to make it more effective when we go into our stretches and our mobility work afterwards as well. So to roll the hips, with your foam roller, take it down onto the floor. We want to try and get in between the hip and the pelvis. Okay, so you've got your hip bone and then the pelvis just above, and it's that area in between the two that we're going to take the roller into. So we're going to come down onto your forearm. We're going to place that roller in between the hip and the pelvis. I'm going to start off with my bottom leg flat and my top leg just in front, just for a bit of support and position. You can play around with position as well, so you can take this leg on top to add a little bit more pressure pushing into the hips. Depends on what your pain threshold is and how much tightness there is on that one. But from this position, I'm just going to have a little roll up and down, just assess the area, see whether or not I can find any sort of tightness or tenderness. When I can find those tender spots, I'm going to keep the pressure on it. So I've got a spot around here now. I'm going to keep the pressure on it. I'm going to hold it for around 30 seconds or so, just until that muscle starts to release off. And then again, I'm going to have a little roll up and down just on the top of the thigh. I'm going to take my top hip and roll forwards into it as well. Just trying to assess the top of the thigh and that area around the hips. And again, when I find the tenderness, I'm going to hold it. I'm going to keep the pressure on it. I'm going to wait for it to release off. I'm going to repeat the process on the other side as well. So we look at both sides of the pelvis, not just focusing on one or the other. Okay, and then the idea is, again, that you use the foam roller to release the tightness in the muscle tissue. This makes it more effective now when we go into a stretch. So the stretch that we're going to look at is to release off the hip flexors on the front of the thigh, okay? So we come into a half kneeling position. Now, if you're on a hard floor, you might want to get a yoga mat or Pilates mat, maybe a cushion off your sofa, place it under your back knee. We're going to bring you into a half kneeling position. So left knee down on the floor, right leg forwards, and just make sure you set quite a nice sort of stable base first of all, so you're not wobbling from side to side. You can also just use your foam roller, just place your hand onto it for a bit of support if you need to. The goal is to create a stretch through the top of the hips here, okay? So from a nice tall position, what I'm going to think about is trying to tuck my hips under. So tuck under through the hips and drive forward slightly, and I can now feel a really good stretch running up the top of that left thigh into the pelvis area. I'm just going to take a little bit of time just to relax into it first of all. So some nice deep breaths in and out, letting the muscle just relax and letting the stretch kick in. I'm going to hold it for around sort of 30 to 40 seconds. Now there is a way of advancing this stretch as well, and what we're trying to do is open up this area through the hips as much as possible, okay? So if I just turn it sideways on for you and reset that position again. So I've got the stretch through here first of all, by taking my left arm up into the air and then reaching up and across, you'll see that I start to open this area up a little bit more, and you might feel a bit more of a stretch. So up into that stretch with the rotation, letting the breathing just relax a little bit as well. and then I would reset and I'd do the same on the other side as well. Now with stretching, the sort of thing that you can't really do too much of. So if there's a lot of tightness there, making sure that you incorporate this a couple of times throughout the day is going to be very beneficial. You might want to do 2 lots of 30 seconds on one side, 2 lots of 30 seconds on the other side. The goal now is that we've released the hips off a little bit, okay? So we've got to now try and get the buttocks fired up and strengthened in order to make sure they do their job of trying to stabilise the pelvis. So in order to do this, a really simple shoulder bridge. If you set up laying on your back first of all, quite like to use the foam roller as a bit of a guide. So place the foam roller between the knees and then have your feet set around hip width apart. The foam roller between the knees is going to lock the knees in position. Laying onto your back, having your arms relaxed down by the side. We're just going to start first of all by trying to tuck the hips under slightly. So what we call a pelvic tilt, where we draw the hips under, and then from here we're going to drive the hips up, and then conscious effort here to squeeze the buttocks and hold it. We're going to hold it for 5 seconds before you let your spine roll itself slowly back down towards the floor. Reset, tuck under through the hips, drive up into your shoulder bridge. Conscious thought process now to squeeze the buttocks and hold it for 5 seconds. Let the spine roll itself back down. Now typically you'd probably look at doing around maybe 10 to 15 repetitions. Just watch on shoulder bridges that if you push your hips up too high, you're going to create a lot of extension through your lumbar spine, which could actually aggravate your back. So making sure that we lock things down slightly through the pelvic tilt. Abdominals are switched on, buttocks are switched on, and you control it all the way through. That's a really simple 3-step routine that's going to help you to free off your hips and also take some pressure away from your lower back as well.